Bríd Smith.
Minister, I think you're probably trying to acknowledge, without using the word crisis, that there is a crisis in the recruitment and retention in the Defence Forces, the Naval and the Air Corps. And if you acknowledge that crisis, then at least if you say it, then you can start to deal with it in a realistic way. Talking about recruiting specialists and the financial resources being available to bring the numbers back up to 9,500 is actually not looking reality in the face. So I want to ask you about pay policy, about recognition for the Defence Forces, and how you're going to deal with the crisis in a realistic, meaningful way.
Deputy is regarding the sea service and its fishery protection role and things like that as well. So, but that's the question. That's the question you asked. So, as I have previously allowed, the naval service continues to carry out its sea fishery protection duties. The most recent figures provided by the military authorities give the whole-time equivalent strength of the PDF force at just below 9,000 personnel. The establishment of the naval service is 1,094. The current strength of the naval service is just below 1,000 personnel. The number of personnel departing the naval service can fluctuate year on year, while the level of turnover may exceed other areas of the public service. This is a feature of military organisations. Recruitment of the Permanent Defence Force has continued in 2018, and as I have previously outlined, particular challenges exist in recruiting and retaining certain specialists. I understand that the retention of such specialists, for example pilots, has proved challenging for many military forces internationally, and it is not unique just to Ireland. A range of alternative recruitment approaches are being developed aimed at addressing vacancies in a specialist area. My department introduced a scheme which permits former officers with specialist skills to re-enter the PDF, and arrangements are in train to provide a similar scheme for former enlisted personnel. Currently, there is direct entry provision for those with professional qualifications, which is utilised for the recruitment of medical officers and engineers. A working group is examining the scope for greater use of such direct entry recruitment for certain specialist posts. As the Deputy will be aware, the Public Service Pay Commission has been tasked with examining recruitment and retention issues in the Defence Force organisation, and requested material has been forwarded to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. I am very much in favour of allowing the Commission to undertake the analysis objectively and independently, and do not wish to preempt that process. When the Public Service Pay Commission reports its findings will be considered at that point. With regard to other retention measures, there are a range of actions outlined in the White Paper on Defence 2015, which were aimed at enhancing the capabilities of Defence Forces.
Deputy, an opportunity for supplementaries.
The fisheries, but the actual question, read it carefully, and whoever called your officials mandarins are correct. My question is about the retention and recruitment of staff and the current policy in respect of recognition of representatives of members of the Defence Forces. PD4 recently took this government to court over the Working Time Act. Are you not ashamed, Minister, and embarrassed that as the Minister for Defence you had to be taken to court for Defence Forces to have their basic working rights enforced? Imagine that. The government can have legislation around workers' rights but cannot implement it for the Defence Forces, members of the Navy, members of the Air Corps. How demoralised do you want to make these people? The figures are already there. The numbers of people who are buying their way out of the most demoralised, low-paid job in the public sector, and you sit there in denial as if you were going on your holidays somewhere. But actually what's going on here is an absolute scandal, where members of the Navy, the Army and the Air Corps are being treated like dirt by this government in many aspects of how they have to live their lives, how they can't acquire homes, how they're being pushed out of married quarters in the most awful conditions in barracks like Cathal, and indeed the low pay in particular, and the lack of recognition for their trade union PD4. You keep denying them the right to be recognised, and it's not serving you well.
Ministers, 1 minute.
Maybe just on the last issue you raised, maybe you would, if you read the published report on the new CNA scheme, maybe you might be able to educate yourself around rights and that. Just on the, you spoke about pay. Like members of the Defence Force, like all members of the public service, have received pay increases under the Lansdowne Road and the Public Service Stability Programme. You know, you're nodding your head, sure. I'm only telling you the facts. From the 1st of January this year, the 1st of October, further pay increases, and by 2020, anybody under a salary of €70,000 will have that fully restored back to pre-FEMPI levels. Also, in parallel, I increased the salary for the pre and post 2013. We're looking at the adjudications that were in the Public Service Stability Programme as well, and enter into negotiations with that. And also in parallel, we have the Public Service Pay Commission, where there was a joint submission submitted to the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform for consideration under the Pay Commission, and I'm hopefully we'll see that in the first or second quarter of 2019. But what I am saying is that I want to allow the time and space for the Pay Commission to do their work. They have reported on the health sector, and now they will report, and they are already meeting members of the Defence Forces regarding the submission that we've made.
Final question.
Minister, you're fully aware that the pay deal will bring, eventually in 2020, bring pay forces pay back to 2008 levels. Yahoo-ha! Look at the way the cost of living has gone up, the way rents have gone up. What a great thing for Defence Forces to be brought back to 2008 levels. Workers who are among the lowest paid in the country, public sector workers, and you quote the ones on 70 grand, they are not the majority in the Defence Forces, so it's disingenuous of you. My last question to you is the core question. When are you going to give recognition to the members of PD Fora? It has been recommended by the European Committee on Social Rights that they get recommendation. It's interesting the way this government is able to recommend certain things that Europe say we need to have in this country, like water charges, but refuses to recognise workers' rights. These workers need that recognition. They need to be members of the ICTU, and they don't need to be taking you to court over the fact that they were threatened with legal action if they took part in a march outside the Dáil over low paying conditions a couple of months ago. That was a shocking thing to do to those people, and that is what's going to embarrass this government when that case for freedom of assembly comes to public knowledge and comes to court. Give these people, the defence forces of this country, the right to free assembly,
Minister,
the right to decent pay and conditions, or you'll face the consequences.
Minister, respond and confine
There is
it to
a
1
civil military group working on the Working Time Directive, but on the ICTU thing that you raised specifically, I asked you to go back and to read, which I publish is on the department's website, the report into the review of the CNA scheme, conciliatory and arbitration. It was carried out by Mr. Michael Barry. He recommended in the report, in his findings, that my own department officials should talk to ICTU in and around what you have spoken about. I have welcomed the report. I'm disappointed that you haven't read that. But I would encourage you to read it and to see and look exactly and to look at Deputy.
Minister,
I'm asking you to go and read the report. I have accepted the findings within and the recommendations that he has recommended. I've now instructed both my department and military to look at putting the recommendations in place out of the review of the CNA scheme. And one of the issues is the issue of ICTU. And for my department officials to go and talk to ICTU on that, and I'm allowing them to do that and welcome that.
Moving on to
what the outcome of that is.
Next question.